in this video, we're going to be looking at the present moment. The present moment is something that we find in acceptance and commitment therapy as being a really nice place to sit in, to hold, to have and to be in. The present moment is quite nice because generally speaking, when we do make contact with that spot, there's a sense of security, there's a sense of stability that is found in that area. Now, the present moment is quite interesting when we look at it from a timeline perspective. From a timeline perspective, the present moment sits between two things. We've got the future ahead and we've got the past behind. And of course, the present moment, if you will, we'll call that in the middle. Now, from a theoretical point of view, there is nothing except the present moment. We can only be in this present moment. But if we look at it from a cognitive perspective, we often do move ahead of time, and we often do reflect in the past as well. It's all done from the here and the now. But from a psychological perspective, we often find ourselves either in the future or in the past. So from a therapeutic point of view, it's not uncommon that we find our clients struggling with either the future or the past. Now, this isn't a specific rule. It's kind of a rule of thumb by some in some sort of way, but the future generally has a component from a therapeutic context. Our clients generally find the future to be anxiety-provoking. Having said that, there are also situations where the future can feel hopeless and worthless and so on. But generally speaking, I find that there is a tendency for the future to have anxiety attached to it. We'll do find depression there as well, but for the purpose of this model, we'll just hold it with anxiety at the moment. Now, on this end over here, the past is generally something that there's a tendency to have regret about. There's a tendency to hold some guilt about what has occurred, and in that context, we'll generally find that to be quite depressive. And so if we've got anxiety in the future and we've got this depressive experience in the past, what does it make the present moment? The present moment is interesting in that it doesn't necessarily hold a particular experience, a particular feeling. It's just what's happening right here, right now. It's not about what will happen or what we assume will happen. It's not an opinion about what may or may not occur. It doesn't talk about what's happened in the past, what we regret about the past, what we wish was different about the past. It's purely around about here and now. Now, from a therapeutic context, what we're actually looking to do is to be able to come into this present moment and act from there rather than getting caught up in the future or getting caught up in the past. And it's times when clients get caught up in one of these areas, and it's almost like a fusion into those areas, is when they start to experience a considerable amount of discomfort, grief, upset, angst, and so on. I want to go out and share with you a case study about a client that saw me after an experience where they were robbed. They found themselves in their own home, and they woke up one early morning, 1 or 2 o'clock at night, and there were some intruders in the house. And because he had woken up and he went out into the living area where they were, they in actual fact grabbed him and they assaulted him, and his family came out, and it was incredibly traumatizing, not only for him but for the whole family. Now, what occurred in those following weeks, months, and in actual fact, well over a year before he came to see me, his hypervigilance went up, as we would expect with a post-traumatic stress type scenario. He became very hypervigilant, and he became fused with both the past and the future. And so what occurred is that he would continually talk about or consider the past and have recollections of everything that happened in the past. And then he would project it into the future, where he was afraid that someone would come into his home. He was afraid of what might occur if he didn't lock the front door, and so on and so forth. And so there was this fusion that was occurring, which led to obviously the anxiety response. Having been anxious for such a long period of time, he started to feel depressed, and he would actually quite regularly go back into the past and relive the past. He'd talk about the past. It would upset him, and by the time he came to see me, he was quite distressed, distraught, and he had played out this scenario that had happened in the past many thousands of times. So there was this re-traumatizing that was going on. So he's come along to seek help with me, and some of the first steps that I certainly did with him was trying to engage him in the here and the now. He was finding it very difficult to stop and to just position himself to the present moment. And he was continually going back to hear about when this occurred. Then there was this chain of events, and he'd just go back and he'd go back and he'd go back and he'd go back. So there's a number of steps that we want to go out and do in this, and it's a 4-step process that I worked with him. The first step was to go out and demonstrate this, and then get him to identify where he sits on this timeline. And generally speaking, he found that initially it was over here with the hypervigilance, and now more so it's in the past. So we looked at that. He was able to identify that, and then I validated that. We need to do a lot of work around validation and saying, I understand how important that situation is to remember, because it keeps you safe over here, and we have to make sure that occurs, and that is something that can't be forgotten, and it's something that you will hold for the rest of your life. So we validate that, and then we say, however, if we spend all of our energy and all of our time going over what has happened, how we're going to make changes in the present moment, in the time that we get to spend together in session. And so that needs to be really gentle, needs to be very compassionate, thoughtful. It's a slow process, but the validation is very important. So the first part is to notice. The second part is to validate in this situation. And then I actually asked him if I could have his permission to raise his awareness when he deviates away from the present moment, either in the past or in the future. Now for him, it was predominantly in this sort of depressive past experience, and he gave me permission, and so I was able to ask him just if I could raise my hand, if I could bring about some awareness that he's back in that spot, and it would be in this sort of gentle way where I just pick up my hand, and he'd notice my hand coming up, and then he would take a note of it again. And so he would continually notice throughout our therapy where he's going. And in that, he started to monitor himself. So we notice, we validate, and then we get permission to ask him to notice that again. And that permission is very important. We don't want to do that in a disruptive or interrupting way. We want to do it in a gentle and compassionate way. And then finally, we ask him, after we do raise his awareness to how he's back in the past, we very gently come back to this present moment. And at times we might go out and look at times there were opportunities where I would actually get him to do a present moment exercise. For example, just to notice something in the room, or to see what he could hear, or to notice what he could hear, to become aware of what he could feel in his body. And other times we would just bring back the topic to the here and the now in terms of what is he wanting to achieve in the here and the now in the last part of this session, as an example. So very gently moving towards the present moment is useful. And those 4 steps again is to firstly go out and notice, then validate, gently ask for permission, and then bring back to the present moment. I'm sure that's going to be helpful for yourself and likewise with your clients, and it does take a bit of practice. So keep working on that. See you next time.